Greetings to our Semester at Sea community. Thank you for joining us for the latest installment of our Wavelengths Alumni series. This online series highlights the talents of our Semester at Sea alumni around the world. We feature an alum from a different industry or career field every other Wednesday at 5 Mountain. And it's also on our official Semester at Sea Facebook page. So today, for those who are live with us, we're meeting 2 hours earlier, and thank you for joining us. My name is Sara, Arlin. I'm the Senior Director of Academic Programs at the Institute for Shipboard Education and have worked here for just over 10 years. I also sailed once myself on the fall 2007 voyage in the field office, and it's been quite a journey all this time with the program and the Institute. Today, I have the distinct pleasure of speaking with Dr. Lary Silver, art historian, former Semester at Sea faculty member, and currently a member of our Board of Trustees. Lary and I have now actually worked on a couple of voyages together, fall 12 and spring 18, and I certainly benefit from his wisdom on our Academic Affairs and Community Life Board Committee. Without further ado, let me introduce you to Lary. Lary Silver is the Farquhar Professor of Art History Emeritus at the University of Pennsylvania. He also taught at Berkeley and Northwestern. He served as an ISC board member from 2013 to 2021. His first voyage with Semester at Sea was actually the 9/11 voyage, fall 2001, and that was the first of 6 full semester voyages in total, including 2 summers. He also sailed 3 times as a lecturer on our summer enrichment voyages. His courses on the ship have included surveys of global art history, studies of art and religion, architecture and urbanism, Asian art, and even global cinema. He lives in suburban Philadelphia and has brought his 2 children on voyages. Daughter Laura was also head of dependent children twice, as well as his wife. Welcome, Lary, and thank you for joining us today.
Well, it's a pleasure, and I want to share my enthusiasm for the program and maybe tell a few stories about what it's like, what it has been like in the ancient past before internet, and also what it's like as recently as fall of 2019.
Terrific. Well, we're excited to have you here today. I'd like just to start by asking, how did you even first hear about Semester at Sea, and what led you to apply for that first voyage?
Well, I have to say that I wish I had heard about it when I was still in college and could have sailed as a student, but I didn't. Right. I was in college in the 1960s when the program really was very young and the publicity wasn't so great, and I would have probably jumped at the chance. But in fact, between my second year and third year of college, I took a trip on my own all around Europe for 15 weeks. So I was a prime candidate for Semester at Sea, but didn't hear about it until later. Then I knew 1 or 2 faculty members who had been. This was in the days when Semester at Sea was still at the University of Pittsburgh. And in fact, I wrote to one of these people who's in the same field as I am, who had taken his family already, and asked him what it was like and whether he could give me a recommendation. And with his help, I applied and was scheduled to go and did, in fact, sail in the fall of 2001. So 9/11 happened while we were on the ship a day out of Japan.
I definitely have a lot of questions to ask you about that a little later on, but I wanted to ask you first, just like, what were your first impressions teaching art history on our program versus teaching at home on a land campus?
Oh, it's a much better thing if you're teaching what I do, which is the history of art and architecture, because you can get students ready to get off the ship and enjoy the cities they'll visit, the buildings, art museums in some cases, and just the history of the place, because art history often deals with great rulers or interesting revolutions or any number of things that happened to affect the culture of a place. And getting students ready to get off the ship and get more out of it is actually part of the delight. You can tell them about the Forbidden City of Beijing, or you can tell them about the Parthenon, and then suddenly they get to visit it. And then when they come back onto the ship, you get to find out not only whether what you taught them was effective, but also what they experienced in a way that no slide or no classroom can ever do.
Yeah, it's such an incredibly rich environment on board. And when the students come back to the ship, it is just so exciting to hear, yeah, from their perspective, what they saw, how they're thinking through it, their reflections on it all. And yeah, there's just no richer classroom experience. It's always been so rewarding for me when I hear faculty return either after a field class, a field program, or just at the end of the voyage, and they say, wow, this was the best teaching experience of my life.
Right. And there's, I mean, as a faculty member, it's really important to really to talk about what the students are going to see and experience. One thing that I certainly want to stress for students and faculty who might be thinking about going is that whether you set out to be that way or not, the experience is cumulative and it's experiential in the way that we've been talking about. So what I have done a lot of times in teaching is to give the students a heads up about thinking through the voyage as a whole, to pick out a kind of place or a kind of setting that they want to see in different places so that they can begin to compare them. For example, depending on which voyage you're on, there are often a number of colonial cities that were ruled by different European nations. For example, if you are sailing one of the traditional trips that goes along the Indian Ocean or along the coast of Asia, you have French colonies, you have English colonies, you have former colonies that have become independent nations like Singapore, you have British colonies all over the place, and even different sizes of these places. And you can begin to have students think about what things they created from the motherland or what things they felt were necessary for their colonial outposts in these far-flung portions of the world. I almost always have students keep journals and I usually oblige them to pick at least 3 ports, maybe 4 ports out of the number that we have to go see the same kind of a building. Let's say a student is interested in religions. If a student visits a mosque in one place, or an Indian temple, or even something that is very common in the Mediterranean when the ship goes there, an Orthodox church, Greek Orthodox or virtually any Orthodox. In Croatia, for example, you could visit an Orthodox church. Even comparing Protestant, Catholic, and Jewish places as we go along, and comparing them. I've had students who knew the inside of a church or a synagogue or a mosque in their hometown very well to compare that in a final paper to the things that they saw in some of these ports. And that's what we mean about seeing these things as experiential and as cumulative as part of the overall experience. It's comparative, whether you set out to be comparative or not. You have so much of a feel for that. Or even the issue of visiting countries that are communist versus countries that are capitalist at various stages. Seeing the difference between one communist country and another communist country. Over the years, the ship has visited Cuba, it's visited Vietnam, it's visited China, it's visited countries that were communist and no longer are communist, like Croatia. So there are ways for students to, if they're studying politics, if they're studying economics, to do the same kind of comparison that they might do if they were looking for building types or the music of different countries. I think some of the most successful courses have been ethnomusicology courses where students use their phones to tape what they hear in the streets.
Definitely. Well, that's really what sets us apart, being comparative in nature, visiting 10, even more sometimes countries in a given voyage. Right. And that's one of the hallmarks or central pieces of our courses as well. I mean, once called independent field assignments, now called comparative experiential projects, but every student in every course will be choosing something, under the guidance of their faculty to right. Compare across the different regions. And so it really comes away as this, it's a life-changing experience in terms of how you view the world around you and understanding difference of others.
One thing that's changed while you've been in the academic directorship is that each course has one port visit for one solid day with the faculty member. So it's not even just a matter of having students keep journals and do things independently. There is at least one day-long experience, which is a class in itself, and is with the faculty member and with the course. And the courses are all capped at a relatively low number. So students really do have a chance to interact with their professors.
Yeah, that's right, Larry. That was such a early on experience that you and I shared. We implemented that change from the FDP, the faculty directed practica, to the field lab back in 2012. And I know that there were some challenges at the time, but I think it's really been worth it to really have that one unique experience, professors and students together, that's dedicated to that course, because you can all prepare each other, going into the day, have the same experience, and then reflect on it for the rest of the voyage. It's been terrific. And you and I have worked on 6 of those together.
Well, I'll give you an example of one that worked really, really well. It might even be on the fall voyage. When we were sailing in the Mediterranean, we stopped at the port of Athens. We had talked a lot about the architecture of the city of Athens and the history of the city. And of course, we had shown the Parthenon and some of the great historic buildings. But on that particular voyage, not so very long before, the Greek government had built a museum, a new museum, to house the surviving sculptures from the Parthenon. And it turns out that an awful lot of the surviving sculptures of the Parthenon are not in Greece, they're in the British Museum in London. And the Greeks have been trying to get it back, to get those sculptures back for probably well over a century. They were bought when the Turks controlled Greece in the late 1700s. And they have a bill of sale. It wasn't like modern looting of some grave. It was a legitimate business deal in the ancient past. Well, the Greeks in this particular museum have actually done plaster casts that they put for the missing pieces. And in addition to talking about what to look at and what Greek sculpture was about, and all of the beauties of the golden age of ancient Greece in the 5th century, we went to that museum and we looked at what was real and what was plaster cast. And then we came back to the ship and we had a long and very fruitful debate about whether those things should be returned to Greece or not. And it's not as one-sided as you might suspect, unless you're Greek, of course. Because the British Museum, for example, has also preserved a number of things from Iraq, which was effectively destroyed during the Iraq War. The museum was looted in the early days of the overthrow of Saddam Hussein, and an awful lot of the heritage, the cultural heritage of Iraq, was destroyed. So a case could be made, that these things are world heritage, not just modern nation heritage, but also that they've been preserved and in some cases would have been lost in their native countries because they couldn't or wouldn't give the kind of conservation and preservation efforts that these kinds of things deserve and necessitate in terms of output. So we had a long debate about that as a follow-up to the visit, in addition to the kind of usual discussion about how the Parthenon compared to some other kind of building that was an ancient temple or a more modern religious structure.
No, that's fascinating. Great when students have that opportunity to see, right, not just artifacts of the past, but understand the implications for today and into the future.
And this is still very hotly debated, of course, not just over those particular objects, but for many. For example, many of the artworks of Africa, which were taken during the colonial period by Britain and France back to Paris and to London, are now being requested or demanded, I should say, by the current government. African governments aren't the most stable and aren't the most well-funded. It isn't clear how well they take care of those objects, but those objects were produced, even excavated in some cases, from their grounds. So the question is, how much, which objects, with what kinds of stipulations should be returned? It's still a very live issue.
Definitely. Now, you and I, we worked on a field class together in Japan, right? I believe you do have some photos. I don't know if it's from the field class itself, but the focus was on Nara, as I recall, right?
Ah, yes, well, indeed, I do. Let me share my screen and I'll start just with an image that shows what it's like to go from the classroom. Here's the instructor, who looks a lot like me, talking about what was at one time the largest, well, I think it's still probably the largest wooden building ever built. It's in the ancient capital of Nara, not too far from Kyoto in Japan. And we're in this particular moment, I think I was talking about the amazing structure that the building has with these bracketed capitals of their columns, all made out of wood. And you get a sense of the scale of this enormous building from that particular slide. And then one can visit it as a student and see what it's like on the inside, see the colossal Buddha that's hidden behind that central window, and talk also about, depending on when you're there, about how the people are reacting to their shrine, what kinds of events are taking place inside it, and also how it fits with other places that they're likely to visit farther in the voyage.
And when we partner with our tour operators and the guides that they hire, those who help to facilitate all these in-country experiences, we always try to emphasize that it's not just walking through the sites, but really truly also understanding how locals interact with the sites. So there's different rituals in terms of washing your hands, or those the fortunes that they will have at the front. So it's a great example of how one can interact with the sites.
And there's always faculty on the ship that might even take students to the same kind of a place, but if they're teaching religion, or if they're teaching anthropology, or if they're teaching music or drama, they may be looking at different things. So even in a place where you visit the inevitable central monument, you might have totally different faculty guides and instruction depending on the course that you're taking.
Yes, so one of our standard programs in Nara is actually going to a Buddhist monastery to do Zen practice and meditation, and that's for a psychology course. Yeah, so it really meets so many different disciplines in different ways.
Let's see if I can bring up the next slide. Is my computer's giving me some static here. I've got the rainbow wheel of death from Microsoft. I'm not sure exactly whether the next one will come up, but I have a slide standing on the top of a very important late 19th century apartment house with a student while we're visiting and checking out the museum that exists on the upper story just before you go out onto the rooftop, which is where the picture was taken. But for some reason, it's not coming up, and I can't even get out of my current slide. So people will have to indulge me, or maybe I can stop the share.
Yeah, maybe it'll fix itself.
That at least got me out of the slideshow.
Have you ever been truly surprised on a field experience where things didn't turn out the way you hoped or wanted them to?
Well, you try to plan, so I can't say that there was anything catastrophic. But of course, you also have to deal with the fact that you're there with 20 or 25 students. People have their own needs, their own biorhythms for bathrooms and for lunches and all the other kinds of things. But nothing that makes a great story. Almost every field experience that I've had with students has been really very rewarding and really something that I've learned from in the process of talking about the places we visit.
Thinking back on all of your voyages now, I've only worked with you in the I guess the UVA era. We worked together in the fall 12 and the CSU era on spring 18. Could you speak to how the academic program has changed or not changed under the three university, Pittsburgh, UVA, and CSU?
That's a good question. Since I live in Pennsylvania, I'm in suburban Philadelphia now. my children, as graduating high school seniors, applied to the University of Pittsburgh when they still held the program, which went to 2006 or 7, something like that.
Yeah, 2006.
And as they were getting their campus tour, the student guide that they had was already talking about semester at sea as a possibility there. I haven't had that kind of contact with student guides at CSU, but I'm sure that they do very much the same kind of thing. Talk about this as an option for students who come to that college.
You know, they do, and they even go a step further. Their recruiters who travel to high schools will include semester at sea as a piece of, come to CSU because they have the program. Yeah.
Well, that certainly was something that Pittsburgh did. At a certain point, Pittsburgh decided, okay, 25 years is enough, and there are liabilities, obviously, that come with hosting a program that travels all over the world like this. And I think the same was true of the University of Virginia. Each of the schools had its own strengths. One of the things I certainly remember about UVA was all the people that they sent who did languages and literature of the countries that we visit. That's less of a feature of CSU, but CSU has enhanced the program in all kinds of new directions, especially environmental directions, where their own local strengths as a land-grant college have meant that courses in, very appropriately for the modern time, infectious diseases, for example, or issues of land management and that kind of thing. The science of the earth in various senses has really become a part of the program. I remember when I sailed for the first time with CSU, there was a faculty member who taught nutrition and the kinds of foodstuffs that come from the different places we visited. That was never part of the program before CSU took it on.
Right.
So
Now
they're definitely
agriculture, fish and wildlife. Yeah, it's been very exciting, and to see, and they're popular courses now as well.
The one thing I should also say about CSU compared to the other two very generous and accommodating sponsors that we had before is that they've done something that the other two schools never did, which is to have this, you'll remember the name better than I can, but the competitive faculty sponsored professorship that they send. They're actually now more than one, I think.
The CSU Global Teaching Scholars?
Global Teaching Scholars, thank you. And those are people who are usually very laureate teachers for their excellence in the classroom. And the stipulation that is made for them is that they have to teach the kind of material and share the things they gained on the ship once they're back at CSU. It's a very competitive application process on the campus among the faculty. And the people they've sent have been outstanding in my experience. And again, some of the very finest professors, but they bring that back to the campus too. It's not as if they simply get their own opportunity to sail, but they not only have the course experience of having gone on the ship, but then they get to bring that back, plus the field experiences to the campus in Colorado.
Yeah, that's been a fantastic way to internationalize the campus here in Fort Collins, Colorado. And then also it's a terrific professional development experience for the faculty and the staff here at CSU, which I imagine for you as well, you found the semester at sea teaching experience, right, enhanced your own career in different ways.
Yeah, I have a book that's, it should come out next year, that is on a topic I would never have done if I hadn't sailed. It's called Europe Views the World, 1500 to 1700. Wow. And while it's only, and there's a little bit in there about how the world viewed Europeans as well, but it's a book which in fact is about the differentiation of how the Europeans, in some cases through conquest, in some cases through trade, made contact with each of the other continents, and then came back and wrote travel books that they illustrated, or made paintings, or imported wares from those countries, which are often very distinctive. And that's something I would never have come to if I hadn't sailed on semesters.
Oh, that's really cool. Congratulations, by the way.
Well, it's not out yet.
I'm hoping for a signed copy next year. I'll just put that plug in now. Well, you talked about how it's impacted your life and your professional career. You also traveled with your family. So what is the experience of traveling with family, and your wife, your children, have their lives been changed through it?
Oh, absolutely. I should say that in particular, my daughter, who sailed while she was still in high school, had a chance, as I think she was a junior, a first semester junior at the time. She had a chance to see what college was like. She sat in on a few courses. She certainly went to global studies absolutely every day with me. Um, and I have to say, as a parent, that it was almost like watching a butterfly emerge
Oh.
from a caterpillar. She grew up incredibly before my eyes, and she got along very well with the college students. I'm not sure if that's always the case. Teenagers are complicated, but for her, it was an extraordinary chance to feel what it would be like to go off to college, and to see what courses would be like, what ideas would be like at that level. She had some very understanding high school teachers too, one of whom was teaching in a double class, which was about history and literature. And they were supposed to, the students who stayed behind had to pick a topic and pick a certain number of countries in which they wrote about, whether it was literature or history. Well, my daughter picked religious structures, not too surprisingly, including that Japanese temple I showed. And there was only one religious structure. It was in Russia, which we didn't visit. But she had only one religious structure where she didn't use her own photos and her own experience to make
Amazing.
the portfolio. And she came back when we still had summer voyages as the supervisor of what we call the dependents, the children.
The ship kids.
She didn't, yeah, the ship kids. She didn't have to deal with the ones who were below about 3, but she handled the ones from 3 to 17. My daughter is an insatiable game player, and she found lots of them among the dependents, the ship kids, and also came up with faculty to visit and talk to them, and various other activities. She was good at it, and so she got to do it a second time. So she sailed 3 times.
Yeah,
My son didn't get to sail till after he graduated college. He worked in the field office. And my wife also sailed, although my wife, who is a very active person, felt a little hemmed in by the ship. She never really wanted to sail a second time. And that's another thing I would say to people who are thinking as faculty members about going. It's a different experience if you sail with your family, because your attentions are divided between your class duties and your family activities, including meals. You know, you have a tendency always to sit with your family. You don't circulate as much. When I traveled alone, I got to know the students a lot better. I got to know the other faculty a lot better than when I traveled with my family. But imagine what it's like also to be with your children and to visit the places that you get off in port. You may choose slightly different activities than you would if you were just going with other faculty or on your own, or with students for that matter. But the fact is that, you know, your experience is a different one if you sail with your family. It's great, but it's different.
The semester at sea community on board is unique and special. And I think when most people first hear of the semester at sea program, they're so focused on, okay, what are the countries on the itinerary and what are all the different things I'll see? But then I think you'll agree that after you have the voyage, you realize, wow, it could have been really any country. I mean, each country is special and unique and memorable, but it really is that experience of comparative nature of also being on the ship and what you learn from everyone on board and how you reflect together. Could you speak a little bit about the community experience from your perspective?
Well, anybody who remembers what it was like to move into a new college from high school will know what it's like, will remember very poignantly, I'm sure, what it was like to move in, to make new friends from scratch, to get to know the people, especially on your hallway. And we have communal activities organized around those hallways that we call different seas, the Yellow Sea, the Red Sea, and the Baltic Sea. And you also will remember how important those freshman contacts were in all the way through your college years. Some of the closest friends you have are the people you met the first few days, whether they were in the same classes or not. And it's very much the same on the ship. As I often say, you know, there are two very difficult moments for students. One is saying goodbye to the family at the port when you embark. But even more difficult, I think, is that moment when you step, and you know it very well, when you step down the gangway and leave the ship, never coming back except maybe for an alumni reunion or other special event. People only get to sail once. And it's so intimate and so intense, the community on the ship, that these are lifelong friends, sometimes marriages, but lifelong friends. Not just Facebook friends, although every voyage has its own Facebook group, people who really stay together. And you know, I certainly, like everybody else, wanted to visit those places I'd always heard about that the ship got me close to or even had in port. But when you go away, it's the people that you remember.
Certainly, I'll never forget that last day of my voyage in Florida. There we were all on the ship, you know, and the impact of it. I'm never going to be with all of these people at the same time ever again. Yeah, so many tears that day. And as you were talking about tears, actually, it's made me reflect on my own experience on the other end now that I work at ISC. I'm that person who stands on the pier as the ropes are dropped and all of you sail off into the sunset on the ship. I will tell you that every time I have tears in my eyes as I see you sail off. So yeah, tears all around.
Well, I have to tell you too, that there are people that you meet on the ship completely randomly. For example, there's one group that is always out there early before sunrise when you're sailing into a port. It's actually a kind of good barometer of what kind of a shipboard community you have, depending on how many people really turn out for that, even though students like to sleep late normally. Or sunsets, the people who gather for sunsets. I had I got invited to her wedding too. One very close student friend whom I only met because we started looking at sunsets together. And it's really, it's you know, it's those kinds of shared activities, or maybe debates about politics, or just games on the ship, things that people do together, because you make the community from scratch too. There are always smallish clubs of mutual interest, people from similar backgrounds or religions sometimes gather together for those kinds of purposes. But you meet people in a whole variety of ways. And sometimes there are things that happen on the ship that bring you together as a whole community, but with the particulars of the occasion with some small group of people. And those are the kinds of things that really last. It's really powerful.
You talked about the 3 different universities that we've partnered with. You've also been on 3 different ships, right? Does that ever change the nature of the program or the community?
It changes the exercise, because the exercise rooms are different. For example, the original ship that I sailed on in 2001 had one deck that was absolutely oval in shape without any barriers. And it was easy for people even to jog that or to walk it quickly. The current ship has something close to that on the top deck, but not quite the same and not quite as accommodating. 2 of the 3 ships I've been in had a film area, which for teaching, if you're teaching from slides as I do, is spectacular, but also meant the possibility of small scale films. Every ship has a slightly different configuration. And I should say too, as somebody who teaches architecture, the first assignment that I give the students each time I teach it on the ship is about the ship, because ship architecture is a remarkable thing. And I ask them to pick what they think. First, they have to tour the ship on their own as fully as they can in all the spaces that are open. which is everywhere but the crew areas. And I asked them then, after they've done that, to pick the space that they think is the most important space on the ship. They don't always answer with the same single space because there are a lot of different functions, and some grand spaces and some small ones, but also to talk, not just to choose it as if it was some kind of a lottery, but to explain how it related to the ship as a whole, how you got access to it, how it was organized, the kinds of things you'd ask about architecture of a building to get them warmed up in observing and thinking about a building. And each of the three ships has been quite different that way. So
for you, what's the most important?
What's that?
For you, what's the most important part?
Well, there are usually two or three. I mean, there's always one big place. We've often called it the Union. It usually has the name of a donor. That's obviously one. For some students, it's the snack area on the top deck. For some students, it might be the library, or it might be the reception area, which are usually both very well appointed and comfortable places. But and so there's several good choices. But I wanted them also to think about where those were, because the Union space is never on the top deck. It's somewhere inside the ship, and it's enormous. And how is it organized? It's much more like a giant concert hall or movie theater or something to that effect. Whereas the reception area is really quite different and much more functional. Looks more like a hotel check-in or something.
That's a great first assignment. I love that you do that. Because it's all in the eye of the beholder anyway, where the most important spot is.
Absolutely. Some of them have picked, swimming pools or
the spa. Yeah. One of my favorites. I'd say on the current ship, the academic success center, as we call it, the library, is really become quite a hub, because it's library, it is a snack bar, and it's the IT lab, and it's just this. It's not a quiet library. It's the place where people gather and meet and share ideas. Yeah. And
it's easy to get to.
Central, yes. Well, we talked about your first voyage being the 9/11 voyage. So I need to come back to that experience. I'm really curious what it was like at that time. Where were you when the news broke out? And let me guess, did you have an itinerary change or two?
Oh, yes. We did. In fact, that was where we developed the idea that the motto of the program should be flexibility.
Semester at sea, F word.
We were sailing west. We started actually not in San Diego, which is much more common, in Ensenada for the students. We started in Vancouver, Canada, and had a northern Pacific crossing, which was very rough. I've probably been on the ship over 300 days at sea, and I've been seasick twice. And one of them, in fact, they were both on this voyage. One of them was the first day out when we had a pretty serious storm, and I did not have my sea legs. That was the day of orientation for the courses, where the students came and asked us questions about our classes and so forth. Right. And both the students and the faculty were running to all of the nearest bathrooms because they were all seasick. Except that there were some students who, as the ship pitched up and down, jumped at the time that it pitched up. And I think some of them got about 12 or 15 feet in the air.
Yeah, I think a little extra air, yeah.
So we were already having a pretty interesting voyage, to say the least. One day out of Japan, after almost 3 weeks of sailing and no land at all between Vancouver and our first port, which was Kobe, Japan. That was when September 11th happened. So none of us have the experience of September 11th that anyone else has. We found out about it rather late. We were, of course, 13 hours ahead in terms of time. So it happened reasonably late at night. And we did, this was before internet, it was before tight communications. There was the possibility at very great cost that a few very wealthy students were able to indulge of kind of ship to shore telephone. And I came, and there was also internet at very great cost. Most students at that point would go to internet cafes in ports. They learned to do that on that voyage.
Mm.
But there was some on the ship. And I remember coming, I'm an early riser and I was exercising a bit in those days before I got old. And there was a student at the computer terminal, and it was a day before we were going to get into, he was a rich kid. He was the first kid I ever met who had a digital camera too, which was very unusual.
Digital camera, yes.
He was somebody the third, known as Trey, and he was on the internet. And I said, why are you doing that? It's, you know, when you're in port, it'll be so much easier, so much faster, so much cheaper. And he said he'd gotten a call from his mother that woke him up at 4 or 5 in the morning to tell him about the Twin Towers falling. And then when we went to breakfast, which was at about, the breakfast hall opened at 7, and I was with my daughter. We went in and the crew already knew about it. So the word got around the ship somewhat slowly. We had, as a result of this, of course, as you can imagine, we felt very cut off. We certainly didn't have any video. We only saw video. The only video I've ever seen, except for the usual clips, was a loop that was prepared for us, which was about 15 minutes long, by the consul in Hong Kong, our second stop, a full week later.
Wow.
In the meantime, we had bought Time or Newsweek International editions to see the still photos. But the response on the ship was very interesting. For one thing, we got some of that kind of poster paper, that long manila colored paper, and draped the union area, the common space, with that. And the faculty wrote in every language that it could muster the word peace. I think we had over 30 different languages among the faculty and students on the ship. The faculty decided to have a teach-in about Islam in particular, the religion, but also the difference between the religion as a whole and terrorism.
Right.
Very instructive, about a half a day of teaching. And the little kids, the ship kids, wanted to participate. And there is a Japanese custom that if you make paper cranes in sufficient numbers, I think the idea is you've got to make at least 1,000 for this to work.
Yeah.
It will bring peace. So they made, I don't know if they made 1,000 or not, I never counted, but the entire union was draped not only with this long poster of peace, but also with all the cranes that the ship kids had made. And another aspect of that voyage, without getting into the details of the itinerary, was that later on in the voyage, we were in India, and we were in, everyone still, and certainly then, headed for the Taj Mahal and for northern India. And one of the stops is Delhi, not far from where the Taj Mahal is in Agra. And one of the stops on the itinerary was the house where Gandhi was before he was assassinated. Oh. And I remember in those days thinking, you know, we heard about the mullahs and we heard about Al-Qaeda, but I remember thinking that, you know, the world was completely sympathetic to the United States and really compassionate about what had happened. We had people in Japan who came up to us and bowed and said how sorry they were the day that actually that we went to that temple that you were mentioning earlier. Yeah. So we were at Gandhi's house, and I remember thinking if we had somehow managed, and of course I know when you're struck, you want to strike back, but if we had managed to turn the other cheek somehow and practiced the kind of principles that Gandhi espoused, the world might be a much better place now. And I remember thinking that in 2001. Only a few weeks later, it must have been probably at that point in sometime in October that we were in India. As for Voyage Change, yes, we were supposed to go through the Suez Canal.
Oh, okay.
Well, that didn't happen.
No,
we were supposed to go to Malaysia, which is an Islamic country. We went to Singapore instead, which has always been much stricter about public behavior and much more organized as a society for safety. And we went not through the Suez Canal. We went instead on the other itinerary option that the ship has often taken. We went around Africa. We stopped at Cape Town. Well, we were supposed to go on safari in Kenya. Didn't happen.
No.
In the middle of the night, the ship made a 180 and went not to Mauritius, where we tend to go now, but to the Seychelles nearby, which also has giant tortoises and other maritime attractions, but it wasn't a safari. I had already booked the most expensive safari you could have, and it was all psyched up for going to Tanzania, and it just didn't happen. So we didn't even have the same experience of Africa. But what was very interesting, and the ship has done this a number of times since, we went from South Africa to Brazil, which has a very strong African presence and
Right.
Afro-Brazilian heritage. We stopped in Salvador, which is the strongest of all the Brazilian cities with that heritage. And then we went to Havana, to Castro's Havana, where we were welcomed in a kind of propaganda mood by the students of the University of Havana. We heard Castro himself give
Really? Oh, great.
with simultaneous UN type translation.
Uh-huh.
But what was interesting, and this is again part of the learning experience, even when it's unintentional, of comparative exploration. Of course, we'd been to China and we'd been to Vietnam, so then we were in Cuba, another communist country. But more importantly, you could see the African diaspora, first in Brazil and then in Cuba, coming out of Cape Town. And we didn't stop in Ghana at that point, which would have probably been even more instructive, but we did go to both Brazil and Cuba, and you could see the heritage of African religious ritual, of African clothing, of African decoration, and of African people, of course, and music. Even some martial arts that were shared between Cuba and Brazil. And we had demonstrations of those kinds of things. So even though I had never stopped to think about all of that, as in terms of the African diaspora, I experienced it and became very much more aware of it, much more interested in it. And that also helped me in thinking about the project that I mentioned earlier, and how the Europeans looked at South America as well as Africa, and vice versa.
Truly was a major rerouting for everyone on that voyage.
Absolutely. I think
It's-
only
yeah.
one or two of the stops were the same out of our 9 or 10.
Then how challenging was that for you and for the rest of the faculty to change up the way you were teaching and what you had to teach?
Flexibility. Well, the clearest example, I was teaching, that was the only time I've done it, but I was teaching global cinema. Fortunately, there were a lot of films on the ship in those days, which there aren't so many of anymore. And we did have some films from Brazil and from Cuba and from South Africa. So I was able to view them in haste and to teach from those. More importantly, in those days, we couldn't download from the internet. There was no real access to that.
Right.
So I had to go with the slides that I had brought and the slides that were on the ship. And those were the old mounted glass slides.
Right.
And I was prepared to teach St. Peter's in Rome and St. Sophia in Istanbul. And suddenly we were going to South America and Cuba. So there was no need to teach about the mosques of Istanbul, but there was a need to teach about churches, Spanish churches and Portuguese churches. And I was able to use some of the Roman churches that I had already prepared and had slides of. And then in some cases, we were able to visit as a group to some of the churches especially in Brazil. So I taught, I used my slides. Oh, and also for the subject of Africa, suddenly I had to talk about masks and Afro music and so forth.
Mm.
So I had to be a little more conceptual, as you can imagine.
Yes.
But I also had a few slides that could do duty. I didn't have any African masks. The ship had a few individual slides. And we talked about statuettes and masks and the tradition of dancing with those on in Africa, which is a very different art form, really, from the kind that I was expecting to teach. But I was able to think about it and to I think, bring the course to a certain coherence.
Definitely. And I can
But
just
it was
imagine,
tricky. It was really tricky.
yeah, especially without, the access to resources to the internet as we do now for when we have
Right.
itinerary changes. Yeah.
We've
Um,
almost every voyage changes its itinerary somewhat, depending on
Definitely.
what's out there. And, at least since 2006 or so, with the internet on the ship, a faculty member can download things and make PowerPoints that weren't possible in those days.
So we will have some people either watching right now or perhaps watching this later who haven't sailed before. Could be a student who's considering sailing with us or a faculty member who's interested in teaching with us. What advice do you have for a first-time sailor?
Well, I would say for either the student or the faculty member to get familiar with the countries before you go as much as you can. The ship tries its best, but time is limited, and the Common Course only has so many lectures. Find out about the places you're going to go. Think about where you might want to go even before your options for travel with the ship come out. Think about independent travel, at least somewhat, depending on your comfort level with that and your comfort level with an individual country. For the faculty members, I have one very important bit of advice, which is teach to the next port. Originally, I was going to teach a whole course on China when we were sailing there. Well, the students don't want a whole course on China. They want to know about China before they get there. Once they've left China, they're thinking about the next port and the port after that. So every faculty member needs to think about the whole itinerary and to plan accordingly and to have something to say about each port in advance of being there. And then certainly debrief the students and talk about their experiences when they get back on the ship, but then be prepared to move mentally to the next experience. So I would say that's the most important thing for teaching.
We call that portifying your courses. Yeah, definitely. Keeping it fresh for the students. They just want to know, okay, where are we going next and how can we prepare? What should we be on the lookout for?
Both the faculty and the students should really think about that learning process, that on the one hand, it's experiential. You're going to see, hear, and experience things personally in each port, often in close conjunction with what you've heard in the classroom beforehand. But it's also cumulative. So think about what sorts of interests you have in selecting your courses, both faculty and students. So if a student is truly interested in contemporary popular music, but also the music of these countries, think about getting familiar with it in advance, but pick a course that allows you to do that. Or if you're interested in business or politics or religion, think about that in advance and pick your classes accordingly. And be prepared in advance to have certain kinds of questions that you want to bring to each port that can build cumulatively into a kind of comparative experience of whatever that topic is.
I know we're getting close to time here. Were you able to bring up those photos at all, or is your computer still frozen? Do you want to give it a try to see if we can see those slides?
Well, I had to force quit, so let me see if I can. I think I might be able to do that.
It would be nice to finish with a few photos from at sea.
It may take me a second. This is an old computer.
That's all right.
Here it comes. The PowerPoint is now showing.
Yeah, some familiar faces in those photos for sure, and some familiar sights too.
All right, hang on. Now I've got to go to share screen. And
we lost you. We lost your video feed there, Larry.
Oh, well, that's not surprising.
Oh, there it is. Great.
Here, okay, so this we've seen, and here's the temple. Here's the top of that building in Barcelona, excuse me.
Larry, could you put your camera back on so we could see you as well?
It may very well have gone off. It does that sometimes.
Okay.
No, it's not there. Okay, that came
All
up.
right, you're back.
So
Okay,
here
yes.
are just a couple of Mediterranean shots. That's certainly appropriate for the coming voyage.
Yeah.
So that's Barcelona, Casa Mila on the left, and someplace in Greece or Turkey. Well, I have to do this to advance the slide. So, and this is Ephesus, but it could be any ruin in the Mediterranean for the current voyage plan. And this, for a very different kind of voyage, certainly the ship has gone on several occasions to various parts of South America. Do you recognize the place?
I don't.
This is Machu Picchu in Peru, which was an option on the fall of 19 voyage that I was on.
That's right.
And then this, everyone will recognize. Not every voyage goes there, but in fact, at least the fall voyage is scheduled to make it to Mumbai, and the students, if they get there, will all head for the Taj Mahal. They're not all pictures of me, although the other thing I wanted to stress, though, is that even students who are interested in science have a chance to experience different ecosystems and different plants and animals. This is Cape Town, which has one of the great botanical gardens, and this giant flower is called a protea. I'd never seen one before, and it was a great experience. Also fabulous is the chance, if you've got the right faculty members, to go and see the animals of a place. This is a blue-footed booby from the Galapagos Islands, which when I sailed, it was connected with the Machu Picchu image that I just showed. We had a woman who was on faculty who'd been to the Galapagos for 25 years. It was her
from CSU.
her main topic of research, and I feel like I got to know this bird because of her. Let's see what the next one is. And for those who have a chance to go to Africa, this was even a cheap safari. I finally got back on another voyage to a safari, and this was an inexpensive one, but we followed this young cheetah from breaking away from his mother, providing him with all his wants, to his first kill. And it was the most amazing kind of combination of horror and fascination to see this
Remarkable.
Find himself. For those who get to Morocco, there are chances to see the locals, both the animal kind and the rug selling kind. That's where these come from. But on the ship, I want to stress the degree to which certain kinds of experiences are unique and fabulous.
I've recognized some of these faces.
Yes, you do indeed. Although if you recognize the guy with the stringy hair, you've got a pretty good eye. I know you mentioned him earlier.
John
For those
Timmons.
who know who John Timmons is, and he is one of the great institutions of Semester at Sea. He ran the program at Pittsburgh. He's the guy with the crown, though he doesn't always look green. But this is something called Neptune Day, which happens if you cross the equator. I've had the opportunity to go to the 0 point on the ship too, which makes you not just a shellback, which is what you're called if you cross the equator, but you're an emerald shellback if you've been around the
And I never have. Well, I'm also going to shout outs to Levon Ho and Lisa Slavic.
That's Levon Ho with the handsome white beard, who's been my dean. And then what it's like to sail into a port. Sometimes people say, what's your favorite port? Which is like saying, what's your favorite book? Or if you're a parent, who's your favorite child? Not a good question that you want to try to answer. But sailing into Istanbul, which is how it was done for 1800 years before airplanes, this is what it looks like when you see the mosques from the ship. Or if you sail into Cape Town and see Table Mountain from the ship. Or if you sail into Rio de Janeiro and see Sugarloaf Mountain from the ship. Or if you sail through a canal like the Kiel Canal or the Suez Canal or the Panama Canal. The ship has gone through all of those, and almost every voyage has some of these things, not all of them, but some of them. Every port is worth getting up for, and every port is a place for not only sunrises and the excitement of arrival, but also sunsets. This is Istanbul as we were leaving on that same voyage. And then I have one more picture of what it's like to carry away your memories. There are souvenirs. That's a Ghanaian drum on my back there. But what really counts is the people. And this is the inside of the ship, which is something you'll always treasure in your memory as well. Each ship is a little different. This is the middle ship, but they're all fabulous. And you can see, in fact, the photos of the students and the faculty on the wall there to the right. And it's really the ship, not the destinations, that is the key thing that you take away. The people that you meet, as well, of course, as the places that you visit.
Well, Larry, that's a beautiful place to end. Thank you so much for sharing those memories and stories with us.
My pleasure.
It's.
I wish those who have sailed the same happy memories, and those who are about to sail, the anticipation of same.
Well, thanks again. I'm going to close with some final remarks here, if that's all right. Thanks all who were able to join us today for this Wavelengths. Thank you, Larry, again. Your work and passion is inspiring, and we thank you for taking some time out to share your story with us. We thank our alumni for joining us today, Semester at Sea Friends. As you consider giving back to causes you care about, we would like to remind you that Semester at Sea is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and we need your support now more than ever. Gifts of any size make a difference. I'd also like to put in a plug for our next Wavelengths, and I'm really excited and proud to share who will be presenting and talking at that one, because they are my shipmates from 2007. So join us next Wednesday, May 5th at 5 p.m. Mountain Time for a conversation with Mike Savis, sailed Spring 03 and Fall 07. He'll be talking about his month in the making adventure. In 2021, he will be traveling to 12 different countries and learning 12 different skills. And he'll be interviewed by Zubin Dabar, also a fellow Semester at Sea alum from 2007, who worked on the $100 solution, a great program. Finally, do you or someone you know from your voyage have an interesting story to share about how Semester at Sea influenced your life or your career path? Email us at wavelengths@semesteratsea.org to be considered for a future Wavelengths series segment. Thank you again to Larry. Thank you to Kate, and thanks to everyone who joined us. Have a good evening.